Hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 Facebook group. And I am here tonight with Kat Delgrosso from College Ave Student Loans. And I'll give a little background on Kat in a minute, but I just want to get a few more people in from the waiting room. And while more people are showing up, let me just give a little, um, housekeeping about how these work. This is actually a Zoom meeting as opposed to a webinar. And I share that because if people like to put themselves on video, we kind of like it so that we see faces, which is just nice to see at night. And if you should come in unmuted. I'm sorry, muted. You should come in muted. I'm seeing a few people unmute themselves, but and so if you can stay muted, unless you really have a question, which sometimes people have, and you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, that's fine. A lot of people obviously feel free to use the chat. This is recorded. We send out the recordings tomorrow. And I'm trying to think what else. If you can put your questions in chat as Kat is going through the material tonight, I will try and answer as many questions as I can. And I will, sometimes interrupt Kat if the question's appropriate as to what she's talking about. And then if not, we try and go through as many questions at the end. So, we will try and answer as much as we can without going too late in the evening. And with that, I think we should just get started. As I mentioned, Kat is from College Ave Student Loans, and she'll explain a little bit more about what she does there and what she does in the past. But she is officially the head of campus and event development at College Ave. And I do want to say a little bit about College Ave, who we've worked with for about 5 years, and they are a student lender, but they put a ton of effort and resources behind educating families about financial aid, about student loans, actually a lot of information you need to know, as you go through the process to figure out how to pay for college before you even figure out if and where you need to get loans from. They are helping to educate parents on the whole financial aspect of paying for college. So I always really appreciate their support. And with that, I would love to introduce Kat and have Kat explain more about what she does at College Ave, and particularly what she did before she got to College Ave, because I think that that's also helpful in understanding all of her expertise.
Thank you, Debbie. Well, good evening, everybody. So I've been at College Ave for almost 6 years, and I've actually been in the field of financial aid related within higher education, employers basically for 30 years. So I used to work in financial aid at Syracuse University and also at the University of Rochester, is where I actually started working in financial aid when I was just a little, I always say just as a little toddler in this field. And I also spent about 7 years at the College Board working specifically actually with the CSS Profile application, which is one of the financial aid applications out there, which I'm going to talk about tonight. And then in student lending, I've spent probably 17 of my years in student loans over time. So 6 of them with College Ave in the last 6 years. So I've kind of done a full circle on some things, and I have a lot of experience just in basically financial aid is all I've been interested in doing for the last 30 years. And so I am used to working with families directly in terms of the students and the families, and this whole process of getting into college and how to afford it. So hopefully that will help for tonight's questions. Debbie is awesome in terms of answering a lot of questions in the chat too. If she doesn't, well, you work as quickly as you can on that chat, I know. But certainly she'll pop in here and ask me a question if you have one that's a little bit more of a stumper. So
Pat, can I
without,
just say one thing? Because somebody already sent me a message and they said,
Sure.
my daughter is only in 8th grade. Is this meeting appropriate for me? And let me just say, absolutely. I'm sure the majority of families here have students in 12th grade, which makes complete sense. But if you are here with a younger and you have a younger student, it's perfect because this is kind of the precursor. This is all the stuff, quite honestly, in the ideal world, parents of 12th graders, you should have learned this in 9th grade, but this just doesn't happen that way. And people maybe are combinations, it's just, it's a little hard. People just aren't open to hearing it. But anyhow, I'm glad if you're here with a younger student, it's great.
never too early to learn this stuff
Yep.
because it quite frankly is complicated. And I try to bring it to you in plain English so that you can feel better equipped to ask your questions over time, whether you, in your case, the person who just put that in chat, you have a lot more time to a longer runway to ask questions.
Exactly.
But I think so you're fortunate in that sense. But for the rest of the folks on the phone, they probably have seniors, juniors, sophomores. I'm sure there's someone with a freshman on here. So this is good for anybody. And even if you already have kids in college, because hopefully you learned something extra for tonight too, even if you have a little bit of experience already. So, all right. So anything else, Debbie?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, so here are some common misconceptions about financial aid. I'll just run through them quickly, and then I'm going to really be talking, hopefully, if you are in any of these categories where you feel like these things, like you might hear yourself say something like these things, hopefully by the end of this this call tonight, that you would have learned that, hey, wait a minute, that really was my misconception, and I think I should proceed and apply to a variety of colleges that my son or daughter or whomever is interested in, and apply for financial aid because maybe I didn't think I would qualify. So one of them is we won't qualify. Another one is I've heard families say over all these years, our income's too high or it's too low to qualify. Some people think that they can't afford to apply to a private institution. They think that they need to apply to like the local college or a state school within their state that might appear to be cheaper because of the sticker price. So tonight I'll kind of let you know that really is a misconception in some ways, because some schools are quite generous with their financial aid. Another one is there's no deadline to apply. There actually are deadlines so I'll talk about that tonight. And then lastly, that you only need to fill out the FAFSA once. Unfortunately, you do have to fill out the free application for federal student aid is kind of like the main application I'll talk about tonight. And then I'll talk about the CSS profile as the secondary application you may or may not have to do. But nonetheless, you do have to complete financial aid applications every year that the student is seeking financial aid assistance. So I know that's a bummer, but they have not gotten to the point where you can apply once and have it last for the whole time that the student is enrolled, unfortunately. So, okay. So I'm going to break down the basics for you tonight, including what is included in the cost of attendance or the cost of college. What is it what's the number they start with, and how in the heck do they get to that number? What is financial aid in general? Like, what does that mean? What does that encompass? Where does the money come from? What are the sources that they come from? And how am I going to find out how much I will receive? How is it that they figure that out? So these are the basics that I'm going to cover tonight. Few acronyms that are important for us, for you guys to know, and before we, go through this tonight, but also for you going forward. COA, there's a lot of acronyms in financial aid, and they become a little bit overwhelming at times for families because they're sort of tossed around like, alphabet soup, essentially. It's hard to make heads or tails of them sometimes. And I'll pre-apologize when you're looking for colleges. The financial aid world is used to acronyms, so they might fly at you at times, and I think sometimes you just have to ask, like, now what does that mean again? And these are kind of the 4 real popular ones that I definitely want to cover tonight. COA is the cost of attendance. That's kind of like your sticker price. The FSA stands for Federal Student Aid, which is essentially the Department of Education. The Department of Education is really the federal department that is administering the free application for federal student aid. So they're the ones that create it. When you apply for financial aid using the free application or the FAFSA, you will need to apply for an FSA ID. So that's why I think it's important for you to know what FSA means. PJ means professional judgment. So that means basically if you have any special circumstances and you would like the college and universities to take those into account when determining your financial aid eligibility, they would conduct what's called a professional judgment. They would, it's otherwise known as like, you would be doing an appeal. You'd be appealing the financial aid award that you were given and requesting some additional consideration based on certain special circumstances. So they would conduct what's called a PJ, or they would essentially exercise professional judgment when reviewing your file and determining if they can give you more money. So that's what PJ means. And then SAI is Student Aid Index. So if you have some familiarity with financial aid, you may have been used to an acronym called EFC, which is the expected family contribution. That was a number that was calculated prior to this current academic year. When you applied for financial aid, it would produce what was called an EFC, or expected family contribution. And that acronym has now gone away, long story short. So the new acronym is called SAI, which is the number that's calculated when you complete your free application for federal student aid. So that is kind of like a key figure that will be calculated to determine how much you're eligible for in financial aid. Okay, so in terms of some of the basics, so these are kind of some of the things families are going to ask, like yourselves will ask. What is included in the cost? What is financial aid? How do students and families qualify? And where does the money come from? So let's dive into those. So in terms of the sticker price, or the cost of attendance, and I'm already using the acronym COA here, so you can get used to it. So there are 5 main components, and these are actually required components that the Department of Education, or FSA, is requiring the colleges to use when the colleges are determining how much you're eligible for. So for example, tuition and fees, that tends to be the biggest chunk of what your cost will be. Although food and housing is right up there with it. And, depending on the college, food and housing might even be like a state school, public school. Food and housing actually sometimes is actually more than tuition and fees. But those 2 top bullets there are the most expensive part of college, tuition and fees and food and housing. So, which, kind of makes sense. You've got to pay to get the professors to teach, and you've got to eat and sleep. So those are the main things that, that occur at college. But there are 3 other areas that just want you to know that are included. They're required to be included in the cost of attendance, so that when colleges are figuring out how much financial aid to give you, they are also incorporating other things that you will incur, such as books, course materials, supplies and equipment, personal expenses, and transportation. So The third bullet there, books and those supplies and those sorts of things, it's fairly self-explanatory. These would be things like, in addition to the books, obviously, would be things like, okay, if you're in an art program, there may be certain art supplies and certain things that are required in your coursework. If you're, in photography, there's certain things related to cameras, that's that sort of thing. I'm kind of, boiling it down to the minutia there, but just suffice it to say, the school has to at least use an average amount that a student will incur for books and all those things in that third bullet. Personal expenses is kind of like, if you think about it, it's kind of like, if you're not at college, you have personal expenses like buying toothpaste and buying things that are necessary to live week to week. If you're going to school for, September to May-ish, that is essentially a 30-week program. It's 30 weeks that the student would be enrolled in. And if some colleges are operating in a quarter system versus semester system, but essentially if you're going like September through May, it's during that 30-ish week time frame, you have personal expenses just as if the student were living at home with you. Or all of us have personal expenses. So that average is also included. And then finally, transportation is included because the student has to be able to get to and from college. And then, typically the college will also incorporate maybe a couple trips home throughout the year in their average transportation. Some schools will, so let's say, for example, you on this meeting right now, let's say you live in California, but you're sending the student to college in Washington, D.C. So it's really far away, versus you live in Washington, D.C. and the student's going to college in Washington, D.C. That transportation cost is going to be way different for someone who's from California doing that. So some colleges will use a radius of where you're from to figure out your transportation average. And then some colleges will just use a flat amount for each student. So you could ask that question when you're speaking with some of the colleges this year. Just, if they are further away from your home, you might want to ask how they determine their, the transportation piece of the cost of attendance. So those are the 5 main components. They are required, as I said, they're required by the Department of Education to be included. So they're in 5 groups, even though technically there's, more than 5 things there. So.
And Kat, do you want to maybe just explain, why it's important to understand the cost of attendance? Basically, because as people will see later, the cost of attendance is the starting point, and it's part of, equations that colleges then use to determine whether or not you have need. So that's why the government has kind of regulated what's included in that.
Right, and that is actually in your favor, because if they didn't dictate that the colleges had to use all of these things, then you would get less money for financial aid. Because if the college was only looking at like their tuition and fees and the food and housing, but they weren't taking into account any of those other things, then you would run short on the money. So it's good that they actually require the schools to use this, because it's kind of like the top dollar. It's like if you were to go to buy a brand new car and there's a sticker on the window and it has all the things listed that are included in that sticker price, but then you went to go buy it, but then you found out that, oh, okay, well, I got to buy the floor mats after that. And then I have to, I'd like to have turn signals. No, I'm kidding. Some of the extra stuff, like heated seats, maybe that stuff gets added on at the end, but you kind of thought that everything was going to be included because that model, when you went in there, you thought the model was going to be all inclusive on that piece of paper that's literally on the outside of the car. So they don't want you to run into that because it's not transparent that way. This basically is a transparent way for the colleges to start with, okay, here's all the stuff that the student has to, incur during a year at school.
I want to speak. I want to see.
And so when they're figuring out your financial aid, that means that they've used, that high number to start with, which is more fair to you in terms of how much money you can get. So this is a good thing that they include all that. It is going to vary. The cost is going to vary by school. Obviously, I'm sure you probably already knew that anyway. So if it's a public school or a private school, the cost will vary, but even if it's two different public colleges compared next to each other. So if you're looking at two different state schools, you live in the state of Illinois and you're looking at 2 different, 3 different, 4 different state schools, their costs are going to vary as well. So no colleges have the exact same cost. They may be slightly different if let's say they're, part of the Penn State system and there's different Penn State campuses that they all are using their own exact cost of attendance based on where they are within the state of Pennsylvania. But either way, so just so you know, they're all different. The cost can increase every year, particularly just think about it regarding food, just the cost of food, just you and I living every day dealing with going to the grocery store. It's the same thing on a college campus. The cost is going to increase for food. It's going to increase for housing because things get more expensive every year related to those things. But in addition, the tuition tends to go up every year. There are some schools that sometimes try really hard to keep the tuition flat or relatively low increases every year. So that's something that you could talk to the school about when you're getting deeper into it and say, what is your average cost increase every year? Because keep in mind when the student is applying to the school, and if the student ends up going there, it's really a 4-year, it's either a 2-year decision you're making, if it's a 2-year college, or if you're going for a bachelor's degree or more, it's a 4 or more year decision. So you do want to ask that question. How does the cost increase every year? It could be a 2 to 4% on average increase in tuition, but then what does the food and housing do? The 2 to 4%, I use that statistic because the College Board actually has data related that comes directly from the colleges. They basically aggregate it all together, and that is typically the average tuition and fee increase every year between public and private schools. But food and housing is a whole different thing. So make sure you do kind of know what's the cost going to look like every year. And what does the college do about it? Do they give you more financial aid relative to the cost of attendance, or do they keep your financial aid relatively flat? That's an important question to ask as well. The cost also includes just basic costs of needing to attend. That was kind of like that personal expenses, things like that. But it's not looking at anything elaborate like having a single dorm, a single room in a dorm. It's kind of figuring that the student might have a roommate and there's sort of an average cost that goes along with that. So it may not be sort of extravagance. It's going to kind of be looking at the basic costs that are included in that cost of attendance from the school. The Department of Education also requires the schools to include meals every day, 3 times a day, 7 days a week. So just so you know, they are taking that into account, which again, this is good for you because you want them to be including that so that you know that at least they're taking into account the student's going to be able to eat 3 meals a day. It didn't used to be this way actually prior to this year. It was not a requirement. The school could kind of do whatever they wanted. So they could put in, they could put in something less. But now they can't do that. It's against the regulations. And then lastly, the cost can also include if there is anything like obtaining a license. I'm using that last bullet there as an example. Sometimes like nursing programs, they require certain licensures, certifications, first credentials, those sorts of things. If that is even something that the student's program requires, just so you know, it is a requirement that it has to be included in the cost of attendance so that when the financial aid is determined, that it would have also, you know, allowed for that within. So again, this is good for you because it's taking into account all of these things. In terms of comparing college costs, this is a tool, this is something that I think you should be aware of. If you could look on the right-hand side of my slide first, the Department of Education also requires colleges and universities to have a net price calculator on their website. And what that basically means is that you can plug in certain income and asset data, the stuff that you would have to put on a financial aid application anyway. You can put some high-level stuff in there, and per each college, and you can determine, you know, it will determine an estimate of how much financial aid you would qualify for. So you'll find it on the financial aid part of the website, or usually, but they are required to have it on their website if they do participate in the federal aid program. So you should find it. You could, if you want, you could just, honestly, it's sometimes easier to just Google it and just, you know, net price calculator, Villanova University. And then it'll pop right up. So I would recommend trying that, or you could start at the collegecost.ed.gov net price URL address I have there on the right. And that will also get you to where you need to be to kind of start at the federal level, and then they'll sort of shimmy you down to where you can pick the colleges. On the left-hand side, I have a comparison tool of comparing net price, if you will, like the bottom line. Think about net price as kind of like the bottom line. What am I going to be paying? And technically, the net price that you will find on that link on the right, and any net price calculator on the school's website, is not allowed to include work and loans in the calculation, because basically the government doesn't want you to think that they want you to know, after all the free money goes through, how much what is your net price? And then you can use work and loans to decrease your net price even more. But just so you're aware, and I'll repeat that because it's important, the net price calculator, when you look at that and you know, tippy tap, you're typing in your stuff and it spits out a net price at you, just know that it does not include, like, you know, it's not including work study and loans. But you can use work study and loans to decrease your price even more. It's the definition of how a net price calculator is supposed to work. It's a federal definition. So on the left-hand side, though, what there is reference to that. There's like this is a college budget planner that we have at College Ave, but essentially what it is something you could also do, like by way of paper. You could just write this out on paper. You can do it in Excel, you know, whatever you want to do. But at the bottom line, when you're trying to narrow down the last, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 colleges, this concept helps you to say, okay, my costs are X, my free money from the school, like the grants and scholarships, I would subtract that kind of in the center. And then at the bottom, I would see, or towards this, well, you can kind of see it's the biggest row. It says total net price. And then at the bottom of this page, it talks about that work and loans, because as I told you before, the net price is really supposed to be cost minus your financial free money that they've given you at the schools equals your net price. And then after your net price, if you have work, study, and loans, you can use kind of the bottom of this to figure that out. So we've created a tool. That's what I'm showing you on the left. But honestly, you can create it on your own. You're welcome to, you can get this through College website, but you can create it on your own by way of Excel, or just, quite frankly, good old fashioned paper if you want to, whatever you want. I do think it's something that there'll be a day next, you know, whether, depending on how old the student is and what year you're in, that you'll be sitting around the kitchen table trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? Because we're looking at the top 2 or 3 schools that the student is interested in. and the money associated with it. And then you've got to figure out a way to kind of slice through that stuff. And so get it in your mind that you'll need to have some sort of concept like this later on. And it'll keep you organized as well. So I hope that helped. Debbie, any questions so far for me?
Nothing major. I've just been trying to answer as many of them.
I'm sure you have. Okay. Okay. So how does need get calculated? So we've got our cost of attendance clear. And I mentioned what student aid index was before. It was a number that was calculated from the financial aid application. And it's basically an index that says, okay, here's essentially what the family can afford to pay. It used to be called the EFC, the expected family contribution. Now it's called the SAI. So cost minus SAI essentially is your need. That's how much money on paper you've been calculated to, to need. And then what the school does at that point is to figure out, okay, how much money can we afford to give the student and the family based on the need that we've calculated. Some schools, may be using two different formulas to figure this out, because they may be using one to determine federal aid and then another one to figure out their own aid that comes directly from their endowed funds, their grants or scholarships that come directly from their endowed funds. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay, so what exactly is financial aid? So essentially it is money. This is the simplest way I can describe it. It's money that's going to discount your cost of attending college. So it's like, remember that sticker on the outside of the car? If you see a price for a car and it says $43,000, and then when you work with the finance people at the car dealership or whatnot, and they get your price down to $38,000, you got a discount. So it's kind of the same concept. The college can discount how much it costs you to attend, and it's done by way of this formula as a starter. So so financial aid will discount your cost, so you won't have to pay the full sticker price, hopefully. And oh, Debbie, I think I'm using the wrong one. My second bullet's there. I'm going to talk more about that, but it's not always based on need. So we'll talk about that as well. So let me talk to you about where the money is coming from and the types of money that is available to you. So colleges and universities have their own funds sometimes. I think what you will find is that if they are a private college, they have some money to give out to, their cost is a little bit higher than the public school in your state. So some of the money, they have money to spend. For your privates, for your publics, those are the ones that tend to have their own money to give you in this bullet point. If it's like a 2-year public school, they probably don't have too much of their own money to spend on you. So you're looking at some of these other sources that I'm going to show you if it's a 2-year college. The second source of money is coming from the federal government. So all 3 types of those schools, a 4-year private, a 4-year public, a 2-year public, they all have federal government money that's, available to their students. State government money. So if the student is going to college in a state where maybe the student is staying in state, so they, if you live in Texas and the state of Texas has funds to give students who live in Texas, that's an example there. There are some states that will allow you to cross state lines with their money. So I don't want to name them because I don't necessarily know them all, but what I know that I think Pennsylvania will allow you to go outside of the state of Pennsylvania, but they're more like neighboring states. And I'm not even positive that their grant program does that. The loan program does, but anyway, there's I would say err on the side of caution here that most states want you to stay in state because if you think about it, they hope that you'll stick around. The student will graduate in state, stick around and get a job in state and stay there and pay taxes. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of it. They want to give money to students who are sticking around in their backyard. So most of the time, the money doesn't cross state lines. So just think about that if you're looking to apply to a bunch of out-of-state schools, that your state grant program in your state may or may not be available to you. This third bullet may be out for you in terms of your options. What else was I going to say about that one? Let's see. I know. When I'm listing these bullets, so the money that I'm talking about could be like free money from colleges and universities, money that you don't have to pay back, free money from the government that you don't have to pay back, free money from the state government you don't have to pay back. But then there are, in some cases, there are loans too that come from these three sources, and then work available to, earn money through work programs. Those are primarily going to be through the federal government. So, but suffice it to say, we've got grant money, scholarship money, work, and loans. And the money is going to come from any of these three locations. There are some other sources where you are also going to be able to pick up some additional money through outside sources. And so let me give you an example of that. One great example actually is free money that you can apply for outside scholarships, apply to many and often, every year. Why not all year? If you miss a deadline for this upcoming year, then do it as soon, mark your calendar and do it as soon as their application opens for the following year. Always be alert to outside scholarships that you could apply for. So here's an example of an outside scholarship. You could look like in your neighborhood, you could look in your sort of more broad regional radius, and then you could look nationally. So in your neighborhood, that would be things like applying through your maybe their workplace has an outside scholarship that they offer, and then the student has to apply, and you could be considered through the parent's workplace. It could be your church, could be your local, some local businesses that want to support students who are from the town or the city that you're from, and they want to support kids going to school. So you would look, so that's sort of that close radius. And then outside of that radius would be, things that might be a little harder to find because you can't just knock on doors or walk into places and say, at the local Walmart or I know Walmart does a lot of scholarships, like Elks Clubs and churches and things like that. Those are easier because they're right in your backyard. Some of the ones that are on the regional or national level, you might need a little bit of a boost to help you find those. So I know that like the College Board has the ability to look for information on that. FastWeb, Scholly, SCHOLLY. There's other ones, basically. The College Ave, actually, if you go to our website and you go under resources, you can do a search in our articles for scholarships. And I know we have in a variety of articles in there, we have some links to searches for outside scholarships. And quite frankly, we have a scholarship on our website that's we do $1,000 every month all year round, and we do some other scholarships that are bigger than that on certain times of the year. So just all I'm saying is basically like try, and local is easier because you might know the people, but even if you go a little bit wider, put your name in for lots of things. Some of them may or may not require an essay. But even if they do require an essay, maybe kind of use the same essay and tweak it a little bit from time to time for the different scholarships. Basically, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. But these could be, anywhere from, I guess $100 to thousands and thousands of dollars. I know, when I worked in financial aid, I remember one student had like 9 outside scholarships in one year, from a variety of sources, and it was thousands of dollars. And I just was like, wow, you're to be commended. Like, how did you do this? I mean, she was good at it. She, I think it's just a matter of how you display yourself on paper, if there is an essay, and otherwise just to get your name in there. So it's free money, so do it for sure, and do it often. Other types of sources may be like private. I mean, yes, I work for a private loan company, so I mean, there could be other sources of loans as well, like from College Ave, but and beyond. So there are other types of things that kind of help you get to the bottom line that you need to be able to afford that school. All right, so the applications, so the free application I've talked about several times already today. The FAFSA is the acronym. Studentaid.gov is the official website. Do not use any other website. This is the official one. You do not have to pay anything. So if it's not this website, don't use it related to the FAFSA, because it means somebody's probably trying to charge you something. It is available normally October 1. However, this year, if last year, this coming, excuse me, let me back up on the timing. This fall, it was supposed to be available October 1 for if you were applying for the fall of 2025. But they are delayed in getting it out there for you. They're pilot testing with a couple of places right now as of October 1, but really, unless you're applying to one of those one-off places, suffice it to say, you really can't file it until December 1 for pretty much all the colleges and universities pretty much in the country. So December 1 is your official date. You can start filing it. That's not your deadline. That's your start date. So if you want to do it early, great. If you want them to, if you don't really need to turn it in until February, then there's no need for you to file it that early. It's not gonna matter. Like, the school's deadlines are what matter. So whenever they want your information is what you should watch for. Okay, so that's required for all schools, whether or not, like, basically almost every school in the country uses federal aid. There are a few handful of schools that don't participate, but most schools, you'll have to do the FAFSA for them. The second application listed here is the CSS Profile, which stands for College Scholarship Service Profile. It is administered through the College Board. And this is only needed for a subset of schools, and it's in addition to the FAFSA. So let me reiterate that. So the FAFSA is for all the schools, basically. The CSS Profile is only about 265 schools. So those are, and you might be asking yourself, well, why do they need that? Why doesn't everyone just use the FAFSA? Great question. The CSS Profile is basically tends to be the schools that have the most money to spend, and they're trying to figure out how to spend it. So for example, high cost private schools, Ivy League schools, but not necessarily just Ivy League schools. I mean, these are like, it could be like a public flagship institution like University of Michigan, University of Virginia, or UVA, UNC Chapel Hill. Those are 3 that come to mind right now that are flagship publics that use the CSS Profile. They have a lot of money to spend, and they want to make sure to get the right amount of money to the right families. So they basically want to get extra information, and the way that they do that is through this secondary application. So and it's not just in terms of private colleges, it's not just the Ivy Leagues, it's a lot of really good schools with a lot of money to spend, you know. So what I would recommend is that if you go to their website, it's cssprofile.org will get you there. And they already are allowing you as of October 1. Well, actually, they did a soft launch prior to October 1, I realized. But they are now accepting applications for the fall of 25 and spring of 26. So make sure you click on that button on the left, not the one on the right, which is the current year. And what you can do on this on this website is you can go under check participating schools and scholarships. And then you can see here all that from A to Z, all the different schools that are listed. So if you just wanted to find out, like, okay, I'm applying to Baylor, what do they need? It says Baylor needs the CSS profile for their domestic students, as well as they need it for their international students. So they must have financial aid available to international students. And that way they're using this form to figure out how much to give international students. And then lastly, they have a yes under non-custodial parents, which means that they also want the other biological parent to complete a separate CSS profile application as well. So that's an example with Baylor. I know like Amherst, they also need it for all three. There may be some in here. Here's one, Bard College in New York. They don't need it for international, but they do need it for domestic and for the non-custodial parent to complete. So you can look it up by college here, or what you can do is to just show everything in the state of Connecticut, or you can, filter any of these columns in that sense. You may be asking, what is IDOC? And that's over on the right. IDOC stands for Institutional Documentation Service. And basically it is a way for, any of these colleges where it says yes, all of the, like if you were to send in your tax returns to Amherst College, but you also applied to like 4 others on this list that said yes in that column, it means that if you send in your tax returns and your W-2s and whatever they need, it'll disseminate out to all the ones that you had listed on your list of CSS profile schools. So that's what IDOC is as well. So lastly, there are some schools, so I'm going to reiterate, FAFSA is for all the schools, CSS profile is just for that subset of schools that want it. And then the third item on here is an institutional application. And that is really seldom seen, but I think you might see a little bit of an uptick in those this fall because the FAFSA is late. It was also late last year. It was really late last year. It wasn't available until December 30th of 2023. And that really, really pushed schools to just way beyond their deadline. Like for them to start that late was really bad for particularly populations who were in like early decision. They wanted to apply early to the schools. They didn't want to wait till like the spring to apply. They wanted to apply early through either what was called their early decision or early action programs. And it just really pushed everything terribly last year. And so they're still late this year, even with December 1. So some schools are like, okay, we need to have something available. And if they aren't using the CSS profile, they might create their own institutional application. I was talking with the school in Rhode Island not too long ago, and they said, we're going to create a short application for some students or for families this year, because we want to be able to be out the door earlier with things, and we don't want to risk it because the FAFSA just kept causing all sorts of delayed problems last year. Well after December 30th, this went all the way till problems just continued, quite frankly, all spring. And so some schools just didn't want to risk it. And so you may see there are a few more schools this year using the CSS profile or an institutional application. And that's actually that's actually better for you, because it might mean you would get your financial aid notification earlier than if we have a year like last year. So I hope that all made sense. Debbie, any questions on these?
Not, well, actually, there was one question maybe about um deadlines about sending in and filling out the CSS profile, and somebody asked can they if they fill out the CSS profile like for one school and then their student decides to apply to another school, like can they add it on later? And maybe if you just want to explain adding schools onto FAFSA versus adding schools to CSS profile.
Sure. So the FAFSA will allow you to list 20 colleges this year if you're applying online. The CSS profile doesn't have a limit that I know of. No, I don't think so. So basically, if you decided you submitted it and you decide later on either of the two applications that you want to add another school or however many schools, you're welcome to do that after the fact. And then automatically, like next day, it's going to go out to that school. I don't know if it's immediate, but it would be probably at least the next business day that the schools would see the data and download it. So yeah, easy to do. The free application, again, you can only have 20 total. So if you already had 20 and you're looking to add a 21st, you do have to remove one and to get that other one in there. I do know that. And also the CSS profile, that's not the case because they don't have a limit. If you had 20 on there, you just add the 21st one on there and it'll send it out the next day. There is a cost for the CSS profile of $25 for the first school and $16 for each additional school. But if your family income is less than $100,000, if your AGI, your adjusted gross income, is less than $100,000, then you automatically qualify for a fee waiver. So a lot of families qualify for fee waivers in that sense. I think probably around 40%, I think, qualify for fee waivers. But otherwise it's $25 for one school and $16 for each additional college. So it would be like for two colleges, it would be $41 and so on. As far as deadlines go, you should, if I were you, if the student is a senior this year, like you guys have it's more imminent. You're in October of the student's senior year in high school and you're gearing up for next fall. So you have more action to take after this meeting tonight to get organized. And I know you're doing your research and that's great. So one of the things you should do is start looking at the deadlines of each college in terms of their admissions deadlines and financial aid deadlines. So let me explain to you I know this is a different slide, but that's okay. If you were applying early decision to a school, that means that you're probably having to do your admissions application and financial aid application by approximately November 1st or 15th, something like that. And for those of you who don't know what early decision is, I know there's someone here with an 8th grader on our call tonight. Early decision basically means you're applying to one college. That's the one college you know that the student wants to go to, and you're very focused on that one college. That's an early decision scenario. If you're not sure where you want to go, but you want to apply early, that's called early action. So their deadlines are early as well. Maybe November timeframe as well, maybe December timeframe. But you can apply to multiple schools in that sense. You don't have to apply to one. So early decision is a binding agreement so that if you're accepted early decision to a school, and if they accept you and they give you your financial aid, you're going to that school, you're enrolling there. You're not supposed to, it's technically a binding agreement. You're not supposed to then change your mind later. So you kind of have to be really, really sure that you want to go early decision to someplace. If you really aren't sure, which most students, they really aren't sure where they want to go. They want to check it out at multiple schools. Maybe they have a couple of choices. Maybe they have 10 choices. they have 20 choices. I wouldn't recommend that. But if, I'd say on average, if students have anywhere from, 4 to 7 choices to narrow down, it's a lot easier on you later to have to narrow them down. But in that sense, if you want to do it early, you can do early action if they offer it in the fall. And then you'd probably be notified of early action, I'm going to guess around January, February, probably February. And then the other larger group is called regular decision. That really is like, people who they want to wait to do the application, kind of like en masse when everybody else is doing it. Those deadlines tend to be in February, and you tend to be notified in March as to whether or not you've been accepted for the college. And possibly early April. It depends. The financial aid last year, like everything was pushed, so all the deadlines got, out of whack. But normally, I'm speaking to the normal way. So early decision is the one college you want to go to. If you don't know what college you want to go to, you want to do early action in the late fall. If you don't know where you want to go, but you just kind of want to wait for the regular time frame, that's going to be probably a February deadline for you for admissions and financial aid. There are some schools, my fourth in the list is rolling admission schools. Those are schools that may or may not be, definitely 2-year publics are rolling admission. You can apply to a community college right up to like the day before school starts, like in August. So, but that's a community college setting. But there are some 4-year schools too that do a rolling admission. I can think of one right now in Pennsylvania, Mount Aloysius College, I think it is, that they do rolling admission. I think it's them, but I know there's somebody I'm thinking about. There's others, there's plenty that do a rolling admission. They want you to apply when you want to apply, and then they'll tell you whether you're admitted 2 weeks later, and then they'll tell you at the same time whether or not you have financial aid eligibility. That's called rolling admission. So that's kind of like all throughout the year. But not every college is going to be offering those things. So it just depends. Okay. So
Can
look
I
at those
ask a question?
Yeah.
When you all said that you can do the FAFSA and get your FAFSA ID, what is the ID? Is it like a code? Because when I filled it out, I didn't get anything back. So is it something?
It's kind of like a user ID. So it's for you to be able to actually complete the application at all. So you know how you normally have like a username and a password to log into anything like Amazon or, work or anything at all. It's kind of like your user ID to be able to fill out the FAFSA.
Okay, so I'm not supposed to get something back from them to say, use this. I'm creating it on my own. It's what I made up.
Yeah, you're creating it. They do prompt you to do it at the very beginning of the application, and you can't move forward without doing it. So that's what you would have done to fill out a FAFSA if you've done one in the past. The FSA ID is essentially, if you just think of it as like a username.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so deadlines, file the FAFSA, file the profile if needed. Later on, you're going to receive financial aid awards, and you're going to need to compare the offers. That was kind of like that comparison sheet I showed you earlier that showed the options of how to compare offers. If you want to use, build your own tool or use a tool that you find, and then figure out where to go to school. So this is the process in a nutshell. And so the different types of financial aid that are available, I'll talk about next. So these are federal aid programs. The FAFSA is required for every one of these. So you can't just obtain any of these without filling out that FAFSA. That's kind of like your ticket to get in to do anything. And quite frankly, the FAFSA, the FAFSA is just really the essential piece of the puzzle. There are some need-based federal programs. Those are listed here. Pell Grant, SEOG stands for Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. So again, free money. If it says grant or scholarship, it's free money. You don't have to pay it back. Work study. Work study is also a need-based federal program. It's kind of limited. The schools get a limited pool of money to spend each year on work study. So they have to, divide it up and make sure that they're not giving you too much, that it would be impossible for the student to even be able to earn that much through work study during the year. But they also don't want to give you, don't want to give you too little, because they want to be able to have the student work on campus, earn those funds, and put that money towards their personal expenses, or maybe their books, or, maybe they're helping towards the tuition, maybe. But I would say, in my experience working on a campus or on a couple of campuses, work study is typically in the range of 10 to 15 hours a week of work, and the students tend to use the money towards their books or their living expenses. So it tends to be, well, it is a need-based program. The federal work study program is a need-based. You have to show need in the application in order to qualify. There are also direct subsidized loans that are need-based. So I'm going to show you a chart that has the loan amounts coming up. There are also some direct loans that are unsubsidized. And what does that mean? It basically means the government is either subsidizing or not subsidizing the interest while the student is enrolled in school. So it means, I'll boil it down even more. It means that, is there interest accruing while the student's in school or not? So if it's a subsidized loan, that's better, because it means that no interest is accruing during school. But the unsubsidized loan, the interest does accrue while the student's in school. So you may see one or both of these in your financial aid award. But you definitely will qualify for, at minimum, those loans, direct sub and direct unsub loans. And I'm going to show you the chart in a second. Other non-need-based programs would be things like veterans benefits, like the post 9/11 GI Bill, federal plus loans, which is the parent loan for undergraduate students. And there's also one for graduate students called the Grad Plus. Teach grants are for students who are interested in going into teaching, but there are some qualifications in order to get that program. And so if you have questions, I can answer those. But essentially, if that is a non-need based program, that would be offered in the form of a grant. But if the student does not meet certain qualifications after they graduate and work in certain location, or just think of it this way, you have to meet certain parameters, otherwise the Teach grant turns into a loan later on. So if you don't meet the qualifications, they kind of turn your grant into a loan and make you pay it back. So anyway, just a caution there. But it is helpful for students who think they're going to meet those qualifications. You can find anything about these programs on studentaid.gov. It will explain in detail each of the programs, but I tried to make them clear in terms of need-based versus non-need-based. Okay, moving on to the state aid. So we've got federal, we've got state. So the FAFSA is triggering state aid applications. I think most states now are all basically, I didn't say this before, but all 50 states do offer a state aid program. There was a holdout there for a few years ago, but New Hampshire finally started showing up in the list. So all states do offer something. The amounts will vary. So some of them may be in the hundreds, some of them will be substantially in the thousands. It is highly important that you check out their deadlines, because some of them have extremely early deadlines. And some of them have very generous deadlines that are like way later. In general, I would advise you to, when you're looking at the school's deadlines, so no, you know how back here I mentioned the first bullet, look at the deadlines for each college. That's not just, looking at money you're going to get from them. That's also making sure that you're going to qualify for all these other things that I'm telling you about. It's money from the college, it's money from the federal government, money from the state government. If you're not meeting deadlines, then you're probably going to miss out on something. So you definitely don't want to miss any deadlines. So get organized, start putting stuff down on a, some sort of tracker, whether it's on paper or you're like me, you like Excel, you can sort of, list a college A here, college B, college C, D and E, and then you can say, okay, what's my deadline for the admissions application? What's the deadline for the financial aid application? What's the deadline for not just FAFSA, CSS Profile? What else do I have to do? And have all that kind of clear so that you don't miss anything. The state ones, though, you can look at this website I have at the bottom here. That's at studentaid.gov. There actually is a, it's relatively easy to also navigate to directly, but I did put the URL on here, and Debbie's going to send these slides out. But some of them are really early, so I just don't want you to miss them. And when I say really early, I mean like some of them have dates in the spring before you're starting college in the fall. So if you're a senior right now, you might have, there are some states that have deadlines in the spring of 25 for the fall of 25. So definitely don't want to miss anything. The FAFSA usually will trigger you at the end. There are probably some exceptions, but the FAFSA usually at the end of the application, it'll trigger you to go directly into the state financial aid application. And in some states, they'll just take the FAFSA for their application now. So they don't even make you do another application. So, they're different. All of them are different, but the FAFSA usually is your ticket in. So just keep that in mind. I already mentioned this before, but sometimes you can take that money over state lines and sometimes you can't. It depends on the state. Okay, so the third large giver of financial aid basically is the college and university. This could be like free money with grants and scholarships. They could also offer you work programs through their own money, not that federal program that was need-based. And then loans, they may have their own loan programs, but those are usually very limited in nature. So I don't think you'll see those too often, but you may periodically see them. Some of them may be more like emergency loan programs. If the student is really having trouble with, let's say, like the last little bit trying to cover their books for the year or something like that, they might be more emergency loan programs, but they do exist. Different types of loan programs at the schools, but they tend to be more limited in nature. That's all I mean there. The grants are need-based and the scholarships are merit-based or academic or talent-based. So that's the difference between those. And then that's it for that slide. And then that fourth source was the private or outside sources of aid. And I did already talk about this already. So you've got your outside scholarships, and I mentioned that before, and then private loans would be another option. Yeah, so I did already speak about that earlier. And let's see, I believe I've spoken about these items, but let me make sure that let me highlight a couple things here. So the deadlines. So federal programs, some of them have limited funding. And let me give you an example. Work study is an SEOG. SEOG was that Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Those two particular programs, the school has only a certain pot of money that they've been given from the Department of Ed. And once they spend it, they're out. So it is not like the Pell Grant or the direct loans where the school can, the Pell Grant is an entitlement program, which basically means if you qualify, you're going to get it, whether you apply early, late, or really late. As long as it's within your time frame of school, like applying for that academic year, you would get the Pell Grant if you qualified, numerically speaking. Same thing for direct loans. The subsidized and unsubsidized loans, it's not really limited funding, but work study and SEOG are limited funding. And that's more important to you to know to apply early or on time, because once they run out of those, if you applied late, you probably are going to not get that, because they ended up giving it to the students who did apply on time. In terms of states, I mentioned the deadlines sometimes are very early. The colleges have limited funding, but as long as you're adhering to their deadlines, then they're probably going to consider you equally. You know, if you apply late though, you may have missed out on some of their grants and their scholarships. And then same thing for the outside or private scholarships, limited funding, and they do have their deadlines. So just, you know, it's when in doubt, just, you know, certainly meet the deadlines, but I just did want to point out the ramifications, particularly with federal and state aid. Okay, so which parent do I include on my application? All right, so here's the gist of these. So on the FAFSA application, you are going to, if the parents are married, then both parents go on the forms. If the parents are remarried, then, or excuse me, if the parent is remarried, the step parent data goes on the forms. So when I say forms, I mean FAFSA and CSS Profile if it's required. If the family who is going on the application here is divorced, separated, or never married, it's who's providing greater than half the support. It's not necessarily who the student lives with, it's who's providing greater than half of the support. So that is the kind of the new rule this year. It used to be like, okay, who did you live with? Who do you live with? And that was the old way. And this 24-25 year and beyond, the new FAFSA requirement, the new definition, which is mirrored as well on the CSS profile, is that if it is a divorce separated situation, then it's who's providing greater than half the support. And so if it's an equal custody support situation, which happens a lot, where it's 50-50, you know, it's like, okay, I live, you know, the student lives with me half the time, they live with the other parent the other half of the time, it's really split, we spend the same amount of money, then it's this, don't shoot the messenger here, but this is supposed to be who has more income and assets. That's who's supposed to go on the FAFSA and the profile. That was the Department of Education rule that came out this year for 24-25. So again, I'm just delivering the message, but if that's not the old way, but this is now the way. So it's not necessarily who the student lives with, it's who provides greater than half their support. And if it is equal 50-50 support of the child, then it should be the parent who has the higher income and assets. Well, income.
There was a question about divorce and asking, you know, these parents are divorced, they each own their own home that they live in as their primary home. How is the home going to be treated? And I guess it would be treated differently for FAFSA versus the CSS profile.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a school that only requires the FAFSA, the home is not on the FAFSA.
Right.
If it's a school that requires the CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA, the home is required on the CSS profile.
And it will be required for both the primary parent and the non-custodial parent?
No, only if, remember here where I showed you the website. So if the school needs the non-custodial parent to complete their own, so that would be the schools that say yes in this column, then the family, the non-custodial parent, that other biological parent, would have to complete their own separate CSS profile in addition to the custodial parent. And therefore, if there's a home, each of their homes are listed. One's on one form and one's on the other.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends, A, if the school is a FAFSA only, and if it's CSS profile and they are requiring the non-custodial parent and both parents have a home, then it's likely that, you know, that equity in the home is going to be considered from both of them for the CSS profile.
Yes. Please note though that when a school uses the CSS profile for non-custodial parents, I'm just looking at this list right here. Like these, I picked yes for that column. and all of them are going to be, they're all treating it in different ways. It's not a cut and dry thing. So for example, and quite frankly, that's the case too, even for this column here, for the custodial parent. They sometimes schools will like limit how much they use of home equity, in a way. So it's not like it's treated the same way at all the colleges. So some of them will use a more of a reduced consideration from the house, from any home equity. And for that matter, some of them that do use the non-custodial will do so in a reduced capacity than others. So if you want to know how each of them are treating it, if a school is requiring it of you and you're the non-custodial parent, the school can tell the tell the student how they're treating it in particular. But it's not going to be the exact same at each one. I hope that made sense.
Pat, can you also mention a little bit, there's been several questions about what if they can't find the non-custodial parent, they refuse to be involved.
Yeah, sure. So I worked at a school that used the CSS, actually both schools I worked at used the CSS profile, and also used the non-custodial profile as well. So I know a lot about this. Every college is going to need to have a waiver process. Every college that requires the non-custodial parent to fill out the profile will have to have a waiver process, because there's going to be somebody where they don't have contact with the non-custodial parent, maybe. We had all sorts of examples. I mean, quite frankly, all the way to one of the custodial parents, probably more than one that I reviewed, had a restraining order against the non-custodial parent, like it was that extreme. And then some were not as extreme. It might have been just a matter of, hey, I haven't had any, we haven't talked to in 18 years. There's just no contact. And then there's a lot of them in the middle where, we have contact. I get a birthday card or a birthday present from the non-custodial parent, but I really don't see that person, or, I see them 4 times a year or something like that. So they're all different scenarios. And here is what you can do if you are in this situation. So go back to cssprofile.org. And down here on the right-hand side, it's called Divorced or Separated Families, that section. Hit Learn More. And then there's a lot on here, but there is a what if I do not have contact with my non-custodial parent? And there's actually a form here that's a waiver request form. What you can do is, it's possible that the school may have their own, but I think a lot of the CSS profile schools allow the College Board. This is the College Board's version of it. And honestly, they kind of created it in tandem with the schools, the colleges. So most likely you'll probably be able to use this version. But it has things like, the status, when was the separation or the divorce? Maybe they were never married. Info about the non-custodial parent here. And then it starts to get into like reasons why there's no contact. So for example, like, I guess it doesn't really say reasons why. You have to tell the reasons why, and then it allows you to share, and then include some third-party documentation. So my suggestion would be, like, you can even see restraining orders, even one of these, this second checkbox here. But the third-party documentation, usually they'll make you turn in, 1 to 3 statements from people who know your situation and know that, you know, who basically can confirm that you don't have any contact with those folks, with that other family, or well, I should say the other parent and possibly their family if they've been remarried or whatever. But it could be a letter from clergy, or I would recommend someone who knows your situation the best. You know, if it's just someone who loosely knows, I would probably not start there. I would probably go with either another relative. The student can write a letter, the parent can write something. It's the personal statement would go here kind of in this section. So it allows you some space to write on the form, but you can also attach the third-party documentation as well.
And
So,
Kat,
yeah.
does every school accept this waiver form? Do they have to offer it?
They have to offer it. They have to offer it. Whether or not they use the College Board's version of it right here, I would say, I don't know, in 2024, I mean, they've been doing this for a while. It used to be that like, no, some certain schools wanted their own form, and you may run into that. So you should ask them first, you know, hey, I see this form on the College Board site. Can I fill that out? Or do you have your own form? And if so, how do I obtain that? You know, we had our own form. And then all of a sudden when I was working at my last school at Syracuse, you know, like College Board started creating this version so that kind of everybody could use it and not have to fill it out a bunch of times. They could just do it once and make copies of it for each of the schools. And so I think probably this many, you know, down the road here, I would bet that a lot of schools are like, okay, we'll take this, versus you having to fill out, you know, mine plus school A, school B's plus school C's and all that stuff. So I would say ask first. And most likely they'll let you use this College Board version. If not, they'll tell you where to find theirs. So, and so yes, every school has to have a waiver process. Honestly, I don't imagine any of the CSS Profile schools would say, oh, sorry, you can't appeal that. If for some reason, you know, you're in a situation where the non-custodial parent is not unable to fill it out, they're just unwilling to fill it out, the schools may be, you know, they may not be willing to waive the CSS profile, or they may waive it, but then they'll still kind of figure in some sort of contribution from that person. So, you know, it's best to tell your story over here on that form. Oh, I took the form down, but I mean, it's best to tell your story as best you can by way of, you know, statements from yourself, from the student, from relatives, a sister, an aunt, uncle, you know, a grandparent, somebody who knows the situation, and you'll be better off there. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
When in doubt, you can always speak with the financial aid office, because they can advise you as to how likely it is that they would waive it, or at least the process. They'll make you feel better for at least talking through it with them and not feeling so unsure. So when in doubt, contact financial aid either via email, online chat, or phone. Okay, so the difference between the two forms, you can see here kind of what's required on both of them. There's a lot of similarities, and then there are a couple of standouts that are different. I already mentioned home equity. So home is not listed on the FAFSA. That's one. And let me point out some highlights here. So on the FAFSA, as of this year that we're sitting in right now, 24-25, the household size is actually the number of exemptions from your tax return. I put on here that for the fall of 25-26, you're going to be using 23 income. I'm pushing ahead to fall of 25, because I'm assuming everyone on this phone call is here for 25-26 or beyond. So we're going to use that one as our example because it's the most, the up and coming one that's in our future. So for fall of 25-26, that academic year, it's 2023 income that's being used. And therefore, for the FAFSA, the household size is based on the number of exemptions you filed in 2023 on your tax return. Whereas the CSS profile is actually asking you for the number in your family and the number in college. The number in your family could be different than the number of exemptions. So those of you out here on the phone call who are listening, you know if that's you. For example, let's say grandma lives with you, or you give money to grandma every month for an assisted living arrangement for her to live in a retirement home or something like that. You're providing more than half of her support, perhaps. You would include her in your family on the CSS profile, but on the FAFSA, if you're not filing your taxes and have her as one of your exemptions, then she won't be counted in your household size on the FAFSA. You can appeal that with the financial aid office, but just so you know, this is kind of how it works with the FAFSA this year. So number of exemptions versus the CSS profile kind of lets you list, whomever that you're providing greater than half the support to. Also, while on the FAFSA this year, you do list the number in college, it is no longer part of the calculation on the FAFSA application. So when they're figuring out how much federal aid to give you and other financial aid, if it's a FAFSA only school, they don't count 2 in college, 3 in college, 4 in college. They only count 1 in college, the student who's applying. And that was really a big change this year that kind of took everyone by surprise because it was driven by Congress down to the Department of Education to then dictate to the schools, okay, here's the FAFSA. We're doing everything we were told to do, and this is the new rule. So if you happen to be applying to a CSS profile school, they are still number in college is still a field as well, but many of those colleges are still counting more than 1 in college, at least this year. You can ask them, how do you put this on your list of to-do items? How do you treat the number in college? I'm going to have 2 or 3 kids in college at one time. How do you treat it? And if it's a FAFSA only school, they're only going to be able to count 1 in college unless they make an exception in some other manner. But it was taken out of the formula, so they have to do a little dance to help you out if it's a FAFSA only school. Okay, hopefully that made sense. On the FAFSA also, if you have any 529 plans saved, you only list them for the student who is applying on that FAFSA. Whereas on the CSS profile, you do have to include 529 plans for both the student and any siblings that you have a 529 plan for as well. Another change this year to the FAFSA was business net worth. So before, like, only certain businesses had to count their net worth as an asset on the FAFSA, but now it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what size your business is, how many employees you have to list it on both the FAFSA and the CSS profile. And then farm equity also was a change. So if you happen to be a farm owner, that it's like your primary residence is on the farm, but maybe you have cattle or crops, that farm has to be counted as farm equity on the FAFSA in addition to the CSS profile. Previously the FAFSA only used farm equity in limited circumstances, but now doesn't matter what kind of farm you have, you do have to list that as part of your assets on the FAFSA application. So you know how I mentioned that you would use 2023 income? When it comes, that's automatically going to feed in to the FAFSA. And the CSS profile, you'll be hand entering that as well. The assets, on the other hand, are as of the date that you file the forms. So they don't go back to 2023. It's present data. So just keep that in mind as well. Any questions on the comparison? Those were the highlights. I do have one more little box there on the bottom right that says sometimes assets are not required if certain income thresholds are met on the FAFSA, that is. So there are certain conditions where if you have income under a certain level, that you don't even have to report assets. So that's more for higher need families, lower income families.
So Kat, and I know you and I have discussed this, but maybe you can just talk a little bit more again about the 529 plans, because there were definitely some questions about that. In terms of who the owner, like, so I'll maybe give you 3 examples.
Okay.
The parent is the owner, obviously of the 529, and the student is the beneficiary versus the parent is the owner and siblings are the beneficiary. And the other example is that a non-parent is the owner.
Okay. The third one I'll start with. Non-parent is the owner, doesn't show up anywhere.
Anywhere, FAFSA or CSS Profile.
Correct.
I'm just repeating that and emphasizing it for the people who asked that question.
Yeah, so if grandma and grandpa own a 529 for this student who's applying to college, it's not their FAFSA. It's not their FAFSA, therefore the asset does not show up here. So
that's a good little phrase. This is not your grandmother's FAFSA, like
not your grandmother's FAFSA. Yeah, so if you want to tell people when they're having kids, like, hey, maybe grandma wants to open the 529 for you. Who knows what the FAFSA rules will be 18 years from then, but I'm just saying, like, so that third example doesn't show up anywhere. The other 2 examples, though, are if the parent owns the 529 plan for the student, that's going to go on both forms. So for that particular student. So let's say let me give you an example. So let's say you've saved $50,000 for Kat and my sister is Debbie, and you've saved $50,000 for Debbie. You're only going to list the $50,000 saved for Kat because I'm the one applying to college. You're going to put that on the FAFSA. Whereas on the CSS profile, you're going to put the 50,000 for Kat and the 50,000 for Debbie because she's my sister on the CSS profile as an asset. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and it's a little, not necessarily confusing, but this is new because it is new as
It
of
is new.
here. So
Yes, this year, this is new. It used to be that the FAFSA and the profile matched on this, but the nuance of the instructions of the FAFSA clearly state that you are only listing it for the student who's applying. And this, in my example, would have been Kat, who was applying, me, not my sister Debbie.
So somebody is asking, oh, sorry, go ahead and finish and I'll tell you.
Yeah. No, that's it.
Why would the CSS profile care about the 529s of the siblings?
Good question. It's kind of like, why do they care about all the extra stuff? Because they want to know what is the family's ability to pay. And if you've saved a certain amount of money for the siblings and the student, it's considered part of technically your total wealth. And that's kind of how that form approaches it. Now you may say, well, that's not really fair because I'm saving that money for that sibling, and I get that. But what the profile does, keep in mind, those 265 schools that use it have the most money to spend on you. So they are the ones who are like, okay, we have to figure out the total ability to pay. And we also, in many cases this year, are counting 2 and 3 in college. So they're actually giving you potentially a more favorable view of your need than a FAFSA, just like a school that's only using the FAFSA, believe it or not. So even though that may look funny, it actually, in some cases, the CSS profile may offer you a more favorable financial aid award. I can't say that for sure because they are looking at home, and the home can really sway where the assets go. If you own $1 million home and you don't have any debt against it, that's definitely going to hurt in terms of the asset calculation inside of the formula. Let me say this though, income is treated at a much higher percentage, if you will, than assets in the calculation of, quite frankly, either form. So the FAFSA and the profile, it's the income that gets treated higher at a higher percentage. It's not a percentage. So let me, like if someone,
it's an assessment.
It's an assessment. Yeah. So it's like, if I've had families ask me over all these years, I've been doing this, like, okay, I make X amount of money. How much am I going to have to contribute? It doesn't work that way, because it also takes into account, how big is your family? How many mouths do you have to feed? How many are in college? What are your special circumstances? Are you taking care of grandma who's outside of the household? Do you have medical expenses that are not reimbursed by insurance that we could be taking into account? Those sorts of things. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into these formulas, but I will tell you that income is assessed more than the assets section. So when you're looking at back to the question of 529 plans for the student and the siblings, it's fractionalized. The asset section is kind of fractionalized in terms of, how much is pulled out of assets versus how much is pulled out of income. So I'm just telling you how the formulas are behind the scenes. There's kind of more that is assessed from income than assets.
So just before we leave this topic, there was much earlier questions about how HELOCs might affect the value of like a home.
Yeah. So when you report on the CSS profile, again, FAFSA doesn't ask for the home, but the profile asks for the home. So you're going to list your home value and your home debt. They're two different fields in the form. And if you have a home equity line of credit, if you have a home equity line that you've taken out, that's debt that you now have against your home. So you can include that in your debt amount.
Okay. So, I mean,
it's less equity that you have available to you because you've taken out a loan. So essentially you don't have, that's your ability to pay is sort of diminished in the sense because you've got a loan that you've got to pay back. So you can count that as debt as if it were the mortgage.
Kind of interesting. Is that probably the only debt that's really kind of counted on the form?
Yeah, and farm. And if you happen to have any investment business debt, that's also counted. Because, like if your net worth for a business, if you own a business with like some buildings and some inventory, and you owe money on the buildings and you owe money for the inventory, like you have business value, you have business debt. So that's also taken into account. Same with the farm. If you have buildings, you have, you owe people for veterinary assistance, when you had, your cows got sick or something, like, you know what I mean? Like you're going to have value and debt for business, home, and farm potentially. But you're right. Beyond that, like consumer debt, like credit cards.
That's what I just wanted to kind of point out, right? If people have noticed that there is nothing here that takes into account if you have credit card debt, if you have a car loan, if you have your own student loan debts. It's unfortunately not necessarily considered.
Correct. That you can put those in the special circumstances section, which is on the CSS profile. They allow you 2,000 characters to type out any kind of, free form text to explain your situation. If you are applying to a school that's just a FAFSA only school, they don't have that same, box to fill that out. You would have to send them a separate appeal form or a letter or something. You would want to ask them, what's your process for me to tell you my story? Because the profile is conveniently allowing you to do it. but the FAFSA requires you to send in something extra. So you could cut and paste the same, text. Maybe I would recommend that. Like if you're typing something in the CSS profile, you're not going to want to have to type that over and over again for other schools. The profile schools are all going to get it because it's all, you fill out one form and it goes to all those profile schools. But the FAFSA schools, you would have to, send them a letter of some sort. So if I were you, I would, kind of cut and paste what you've typed in special circumstances on the profile, put it in a Word document and save it. And so you have it, and that way you can reuse it and tweak it as you wish. Just my suggestion. Any questions on that?
Nope. Let's go on.
So I've already talked about this slide in terms of timing. So again, early decision, November-ish is when you apply. You probably find out in December or January about your financial aid. Early action, you apply in November-ish or early December, and you probably won't find out till closer to February. Regular decision, you're probably applying by February, and you're probably finding out about financial aid in March, potentially early April. Enrolling admission, it's open all year round. So usually when you apply, you probably find out 2 weeks later how much financial aid you'll get. But again, those are not every school offers all of these. Every school offers regular decision, but not every school offers the other three. So you just have to you can look at their website and figure out what they have. You could use bigfuture.collegeboard.org to look up colleges and do a search of the schools there and figure out who has what. I would recommend going straight to the source of the college because that's your best source. Or you could always call, email, or do online chat with schools too. But this is why it's good to have a tracker of some sort so you can keep track of it all. Because by the time you start looking at 5 schools, you're like, oh, wait a minute, what did I see about, XYZ school? I can't remember now. So you got to kind of put it down in front of you so you can look back on it. So that's my recommendation there. Okay, so this is and I know we're going long, we always do, but the calculation of need and kind of the gap. So let's say your cost of attendance at a school is $75,000. That's the sticker price. The SAI that got calculated from the FAFSA is $35,000. And that means your calculated need is $40,000. 75 minus 35 is 40. The cost of attendance minus, let's say that the school can't afford to give you the full 40,000 up here. Even though your need was calculated to that, they don't meet full need at that school. Some schools meet full need, but a lot of schools really can't afford to. So let's say, for example, they offered you 25. That means that your actual gap is 50. So this is really just to show you that, sometimes your gap might be a little bit bigger than you expected because they can't meet 100% of your need. So it depends on the school. You can certainly ask them the question of, do you meet full need? How do you, and it's going to depend, on things, but you can always ask, what do you use? And you don't have to necessarily ask this early on, but you could, or you could wait till your financial aid offers arrive. And then as you're comparing them, if one of them looks really way out of whack compared to the other one, or other multiple ones, you could always, make phone calls accordingly at that time. And that's probably better because then at least you have some numbers in front of you as well.
Oh, wait, Kat, sorry, before somebody was just asking, what if your SAI is negative?
If you have a negative SAI, so SAI now, it used to be that, your family contribution that got calculated from the FAFSA could never go below 0 on the form. Like it would be, okay, 0 is high need, like you have a lot of need, and 0 is 0. No, nothing goes below 0. Well, now with the new FAFSA this year, started this year, the SAI can go to up to negative $1,500. And it really just tells the schools, honestly, it just tells the schools that you're especially needy. And it doesn't give you any more Pell Grant. It doesn't give you any more financial aid. You can't have any financial aid that exceeds your cost of attendance. So your cost of attendance of 75,000 in this example, let's say your calculated SAI was negative 1,500. They can't give you financial aid up to 76,500. It doesn't work that way. They can only give you up to 75,000. It's really more of an indicator to the school that you're particularly high need, and they may possibly give those families a little bit more on the SEOG grant that I mentioned earlier. That's kind of like limited funding. They may also give you maybe different consideration on federal work study and maybe some of their grant funding at the college level, because they know that a family that produced a negative number as a family contribution essentially is particularly high need. Family doesn't have the funds to be able to pay towards college, comparatively speaking. So that's how the negative SAI works. That's new this year. So it's more of an indicator, but you can't get financial aid above cost of attendance. That is for sure. So some of these I think I've already said. You can do the FAFSA up to 20 colleges. The profile doesn't have a limit. Each person on the FAFSA is called a contributor. They do all have to get an FSA ID, which I was mentioning to, I think her name was Dion, maybe. It's like getting a username when you start a form. So, or when you start, opening and having an account within a website. So just think of it as like a user ID. But it is something that you want to keep secure, because it's your income and asset data. So it's very, you should be taking special care of your FSA ID and your password to get in, so that it's protected. So each contributor, the contributor would be like the student is a contributor, the parent is a contributor, maybe another parent is a contributor. They have to provide consent to release IRS data from the 2023 taxes, in my example of using for fall of 26. So you have to basically say, yep, it's okay for you to pull pull the data over from the IRS in order to kind of dump it into the FAFSA. So you have to provide consent. When the FAFSA is filed, you're going to get what's called a FAFSA submission summary, and that will have your SAI on it. So it will be on the top right-hand corner-ish, give or take. And it'll tell you what your SAI indicator is. And then also the FAFSA submission summary will be very helpful in terms of like, if you qualified for a Pell Grant, it'll tell you that right there on the submission summary as well. And then of course the colleges are the ones that are going to kind of put all the stuff together for you in a financial aid award letter. And it will include the Pell Grant if you qualify for one and other things. But the FAFSA submission summary at least gives you kind of like some highlights of what your SAI indicates. Your contribution from, well, basically your CSS profile is different. So if you're filing that, just know that it has a different login. It's a College Board login. It's a whole separate story. But basically the two forms are different. You don't get a submission summary per se for the CSS profile, but you are able to kind of print out what you filed on that form as well. It will not have your family contribution listed conveniently on there, because they don't put it on there. There are 3 ways to get Pell. You can either qualify for the automatic maximum Pell by looking at your adjusted gross income compared to a multiplier of the USDA's, U.S. Department of Agriculture's poverty guidelines, which is a federal chart, basically. So it looks at that and it says, okay, well, do you qualify for automatically getting the maximum Pell, which is $7,395? If not, then it'll go on to the second part of the calculation, which the Pell is based on specifically your SAI. So it will look at the maximum Pell minus your SAI, and that's what your Pell grant will be. So if the max Pell is $7,395 and your SAI is $2,000 even, you'd qualify for $5,395 Pell grant. If your SAI is bigger than the $7,395, and Pell can change year after year, so it just happens to be that number now, but next year it could be different. Let's say your SAI is $10,000 and the max Pell is $7,395. You wouldn't get any Pell in scenario 2. So the formula automatically just pushes along to the third scenario, where maybe you would qualify at least for the automatic minimum Pell. And that looks at kind of adjusted gross income compared to a higher poverty guideline to see if at least you would qualify for kind of like a base minimum. And that's the Pell Grant there. This is the chart regarding the loans. The direct loans, the unsubsidized and the direct unsubsidized and the direct subsidized loans. These are the amounts you can get as a freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior. And then when you're a graduate level, if you go to grad school, then there are other dollar amounts beyond that. But this is the lifetime maximum for undergraduates is $31,000 through the loans basically per academic year or per enrollment level, freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior. The interest rate and origination fees for the student loan, this is all the student loan page here. It's a 6.533% rate this year, and it has a 1.057% origination fee, which basically means if you take out $5,500 as a freshman, you're going to be paying 6.533% on $5,500, of which some of that interest could be accruing during school. Some of it could be delayed till after school. The origination fee of 1.057, so it would be basically 5,500 times 1.057. So basically you would have $58.14 deducted from the loan. So your college would net $5,500 minus that fee to pay towards your bill. So it's kind of like an upfront fee that you have to carve out. Even though you're paying back $5,500, you're paying, you're only netting a little bit less than that to pay towards your bill. So again, this is the federal student loan, direct subsidized and unsubsidized added together in those amounts that you see to the right.
So Kat, I mean, most students are going to be considered dependent, but we did include the column that says independent undergraduate. So somebody's asking what that means.
Okay, so on the FAFSA application, there are, I think, 5 or 6 questions that basically indicate whether or not you can file on your own as an independent. One of which is age related. So if you're over the age of 24, so if let's say I go back to college, I'm an independent student because I'm well over 24. Maybe you're a veteran, maybe you're an orphan or a ward of the court, maybe you're homeless. I might be missing one. But basically if you are checking yes to any of those boxes on the FAFSA, then you would automatically be considered an independent student for as an undergraduate. And you can apply on your own without parental data. Graduate students are automatically independent just by the nature of the FAFSA application. If you're a grad student, well, that is one of the questions. Are you a grad student? If you're a grad student, you automatically get counted as, you don't have to put parent data down. But yeah, those were the parameters that are on the FAFSA, any of those that I just named. Otherwise, you're considered dependent, and your parent data does have to get included on the form. So the plus loan is another option. The parent plus loan can be used to borrow kind of well, if you kind of go back here, it can help you cover any of your family contribution that you need to cover. You know, I said earlier, it's not need-based. You can go up to the cost of attendance minus any other financial aid that you have. The interest rate is pretty high this year. It's 9.08%. And that rate was as of July 1 of 2024 through June 30th of 2025. So for you folks who are looking to apply for 25, 26 or beyond, they set those rates in May. So you won't know till next May what the rate will be. But
Damn it, answer the phone.
But this year it's 9.08%, and the origination fee is 4.228%. So again, like I said here with the student loan, they take, they take that 4.228% off, which is a lot of money if you're borrowing like 10,000, anything 10, 20,000, they're taking off that right off the bat. So you're not going to net that towards your bill. So that's the 4.228% origination fee. And then private loans, like where I work, usually we don't have it, not just us, but I mean, usually private loans don't have origination fees if they're private educational lenders like my company. The interest rates tend to be fixed or variable, whereas the PLUS loan is a fixed rate. The fixed or variable is a choice of yours. You can choose whether you want to pick fixed or variable. And similar to the PLUS loan, you can borrow up to the cost minus other financial aid for these as well. Okay, we must be getting close here, Debbie. I'm assuming.
Yes.
So you're going to get an award notification. Otherwise, you could call it like a financial aid offer letter, financial aid award. There's a lot of different naming conventions for it, but essentially you're going to be awarded something. And so you'll be viewing that probably either online and or paper. Some schools still send paper just because they like that special touch, but at minimum, you'd be able to access that online for sure. The family should basically kind of sit down and review what the gap is at each of the different schools that you've received financial aid from, and figure out, what's the best choice for you financially, academically, socially, emotionally, all those things that go into college selection. And as I said earlier, please consider it as a multi-year decision, because it's not just that 1 year you're looking at. It really is like, okay, what happens the next year and the next year and the next year? And before you know it, if you've borrowed too much in year one and your circumstances, if your circumstances aren't changing, you're going to have to kind of multiply that out and figure that, okay, is this really the school that we want to go to? And that's a tough decision at the end, but that's something you prepare for, and just make sure you're looking at it as a multi-year decision. I mentioned special circumstances where you can put this on the CSS profile or write a letter to the schools, but they may include things like K through 12 tuition expenses that you're paying for secondary ed. Maybe certainly job loss and pay reduction are the biggest ones, and medical expenses. I mentioned that earlier. So they could be anything. It's your story. So if there are certain things that weren't asked for on the form and you want to be able to tell the story, please make sure you do let the financial aid offices know by way of, whatever their means to obtain that information from you might be. They might have an appeal form. If it's a profile school, they'll take it from there, from what you filed on the CSS profile and that sort of thing. So, but just make sure that you do know that there is a process for this. And quite frankly, every college does have to have an appeal process. They're kind of required by the Department of Education. Actually, that's new this year too. They have to have an appeal process where the family can tell their story. So they should be, they're used to getting these types of calls. So if it's you, please make sure that you do this. And then lastly, some other ways to save money. You could certainly start at a community college and then go on to a 4-year school. You want to make sure that those credits will transfer. So if you started a community college that happens to have like a 2+2 program with a 4-year school, that's ideal, because then like they might automatically accept you in to their school. And then you know that you won't lose any credits that maybe you took like a general ed class, course at a community college, and then the second school that's taking you in for a bachelor's says, oh, well, we don't want you to do that. We want you to take our own of that. Then you've lost out on that whole class and you've paid money for it. So certainly you want to ask questions up front on that. 2+2 programs I know are good because they allow you a seamless transition from the community college to the 4-year, but certainly there are plenty of non-2+2 programs that don't have those affinity agreements where you'll do just fine. My nephew went to community college, and then he went on to nursing school, and he's an RN, and he got out cheaper because of it. He didn't have the expense in the first 2 years as much. Outside and private scholarships, I talked about a lot earlier. Take advantage of all the sources, the work study, the loans, the free money, all that stuff helps you get through. And, it's an investment in your life and your child's life, the student's life. So, even a little bit of loan debt is okay, as long as it's not excessive. And being an RA basically means that you might be the student who's like typically, it wouldn't be a freshman, but it would be like an upper class student who would like to be an RA in a dorm or in campus-based housing. It's kind of like being the manager of the dorm. Maybe it's a floor or 2 of the dorm or the campus-based housing. And the student ends up getting some of their room and their food and their housing taken care of because of the work that they're putting into being an RA. So it gives them great resume builder stuff and great experience. And it gives you financial benefits from just the help with some of your food and housing costs as well. Make sure you appeal if you need to. The student could live at home, although that does change their experience level of college, but in some cases that is necessary. And it is certainly an option if you have a college nearby that the student is interested in attending. And then living off campus with roommates tends to, break down the cost of housing a little bit, and might be a little bit cheaper for upper class students to live with roommates. Freshmen tend to have to live on campus normally. So it'll depend on the colleges themselves. And that is the material, which I don't know how you folks are all still, 126 of you at least are still here. And I apologize, but there's just always so much material. So
yeah, this is great. This is like a tomb of of financial aid information. And I feel like I answered a lot of the questions in the chat and asked you questions. The only thing I wanted to maybe have you talk about, because I think this is a good question towards the end, related to the loan amounts from the federal government, and just maybe just talk a little bit of, somebody said they seem so low. That's one thing. And the other question related to loans, which I think is a good question now, is will the change in the federal interest rate impact the student loan rates in the future?
Okay. So I'll go with the last one first. So as I said, the interest rates are set in May for the upcoming academic year. So every May they're set for a whole year. So it's kind of unfortunate that these 2 rates were set for student loans and here the plus loan, because now that the federal rate is going down, well, hopefully will keep going down. This rate is locked in for the whole year. So it won't change. They lock it in for the entire year. Whereas like with the private loan, that rate could change daily or every week, because the lenders are watching what the federal rates are doing, and potentially they want to slide it based on, what the federal rate's doing. So unfortunately, these federal loans are stuck for the year as is, and then the next year, like, so for 25-26, it'll be based on May, the auction of the T-bill that happens in May of 2025. So yeah, that's how that works. And the amounts are so low because honestly, they've so it used to be that if you look at the dependent column, well, actually you can look at all the columns. Not where the lifetime max is, but like per year for each of the class years. Lop off $2,000 from each of those line items, and the amounts used to be, that's all they were, until 2012, maybe, I think. And no, is that right? Yeah, it was during the time of the 2008 recession, and somewhere in that time frame. So it actually was probably 2009 that $2,000 was added to each of the categories there. And that's the last time that whole thing has changed. And that was probably 2009. So we're talking 15 years ago is the last time that they did anything with the dollar amounts.
It feels like it is time to change these amounts, but quite honestly, it's up to Congress. So
it is. Yeah, it's Congress. I mean,
yeah.
it's unfortunately, it's like sometimes moving a steamship, it's just slow. And even if a senator or somebody wants to propose a bill and it goes so far and it just never gets anywhere, like it unfortunately gets a little clogged. Any kind of enhancement gets clogged sometimes because it doesn't always bubble up to the top when it hits the House or the Senate. So that's why. But the last time it changed was literally probably 15 years ago during the last recession.
And there's one other question. Oh, and you might have said this, but just to repeat it, somebody is asking about will contributing to a Roth IRA or traditional IRA lower their AGI for FAFSA?
Okay, so this is tricky. Okay, so the FAFSA no longer asks for any 401k, 403b, 414h, those types of things that show up on a W-2. Let me put it to you this way. If it shows up on a W-2, it doesn't show up on the FAFSA anymore as your retirement contribution. So the IRA is on the FAFSA, is on the tax return because it's considered an adjustment to income. So your AGI is actually less because of the fact that you have an IRA on your tax return. I'm mixing things a little here, but let me go back to my W-2 example. If it's not on your if it's on your W-2, the FAFSA doesn't see it. Think of it that way. However, the CSS profile is going to make you report it either way. The IRA is on the tax return. So therefore, that is viewable. Your AGI is reduced, but the school, but it is going to, yes, if it's on the tax return, it's going to be counted because it can be seen there. Think of it this way. It's the stuff is getting downloaded from the IRS. The IRS. So I go back to this slide here, the fourth bullet down. Whatever's coming from the IRS tax data is going to plunk in there. So you can see your IRA, but you're like a 401k is not on the tax return. It's on a W-2, and the W-2s are not authorized to come through this on the FAFSA. So does that help? Because it's like, if it's on the W-2, it's not going anywhere. It's on the FAFSA because they're not pulling anything from the W-2 anymore.
we'll have a last question. Somebody's just asking for some examples of what untaxed income would be.
Oh, okay. Untaxed income would be like, well, quite frankly, your IRA. For the CSS profile would be things like your 401k that are, it's not taxed. It's like I contribute to a 401k. They pull it out of my paycheck every 2 weeks. I'm not taxed on it. That's untaxed income. Untaxed interest that's on a tax return, that will show up on the FAFSA too, because again, it shows up on a tax return. Therefore, it's plunked in there. It's plunked into the FAFSA. But untaxed interest income is another one. If you are like a lower income family and you qualify for child tax credits or earned income credit on the tax return, that's another example of untaxed income for higher need families. And let me think. It used to be also, I didn't mention this, but child support. So if you receive child support, it used to be counted as part of your income on the FAFSA, but now it's going to be part of assets. So again, if you receive child support, it's going to be counted in your assets, not your income. It used to be counted as income as of last year, but not this year. So that was untaxed income, but now child support received is only, it is counted on the CSS profile, but it's either way, it's moved to assets, child support received. So anyway, those are usually it's retirement income mostly, but it does have, there could be other examples. The instructions on both forms will be descriptive and will name all kinds of things that will help you guide you through, that question.
And one last question. This is a good one. I hadn't really seen this one about 401k loans. If somebody has a loan against their 401k, then what are they reporting as the value of the 401k?
So you only have to report your 401k or your retirement value on the profile, not the FAFSA. So you see that here, the second row from the bottom. Your retirement value, I guess it would be, well, technically, if you have a loan against it, eventually you're paying back that loan and it goes back into your value. I would probably have to rely on the instructions on the CSS profile as to what that says on that. But it's probably based on whatever it shows as its value today. So if you were to look it up on, like, if you have TIAA-CREF or Fidelity or whatever you use for your retirement asset, whatever the value is of that day is my gut instinct as to how you file it, but I would lean on the instructions when you get there. But my guess is it's probably the value as it is that day.
Yeah.
Because technically, like, if you were to they're not asking you to withdraw your retirement, but technically if you were to withdraw your retirement, you can't withdraw the loan part because you still have to pay that back. So that's why I'm saying it's probably whatever the value is that day.
Okay, Kat.
Just a guess.
Thank you. Ton of information, a lot for everybody to absorb. I go back to the beginning for the people who were here who may have younger students, like, kudos to you. As you can see, this is a lot of information to understand, and the earlier you understand it, the better. And some people were asking, just confirming the tax year. And again, if you're here with a younger student, you can see, if you understand all of these ins and outs, you might make different changes, that might impact your taxes that are used for financial aid, if it's going to make an impact on, aid that you might get. But So there's a huge advantage to knowing all this information early. And for everybody else, it's just time to kind of, absorb the information and apply it kind of, somewhat immediately if you have, as soon as applying early decision, early action. You're gonna probably be filling out CSSS profile forms within the next 6 weeks. And then FAFSA. So
Yeah.
all good information to know. Thank
Yeah.
you, Kat. And
Thank you, Debbie, for answering all the questions in chat as well.
no problem. And if
You're busy.
people have questions, and a few people who I mentioned, they can always send me questions at support@rhodescollege.com. I will reach out to Kat if I can't, answer them. She's always been very helpful. We've followed up and done research for people. So we're here to help.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Time to go to sleep.
All right. Have a good night.
Okay. Good night. Bye.